and half of those, now we're down to about 5%, are like the ones that you can convince to change their vote one way or another. And realistically, you only want half of them. You're only going to spend money. All these campaigns are trying to convince half of that half to flip. So now all elections are down to trying to convince less than 3% of all voting age adults to vote a certain direction. So that means that 97% of 97, like these campaigns, the media are all operating under this idea that that they only have to convince the ideas of 3% of the rest of the population. This is not democracy. I mean, although people like to say this is the exact the people who are voting and through democratic means are setting the tone for our elections. It's true, but there is an enormous silent majority out there that we should continue to use that phrase until people get tired of hearing about it.
What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass.
Okay?
All right.
Got a cop.
All right, everybody, this is In Liberty and Health, episode number 159, and today I got the Libertarian Party's perhaps the least favorite person. I shouldn't say the Libertarian Party's, but people who might be kind of in this space. They threw a lot of rocks his way. I think he's a great guy, and I see where they're coming from, but I got Hector Roos with me today. How you doing, man?
All right, good. Thanks for having me, Kyle. And it's quite the collection of guitars you have in the background. And I think we're gonna rock and roll tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, that's one of my favorite things to do personally. You have some interesting tastes in music, if I remember correctly, because I think the way that you and I really started kind of talking back and forth was actually over music. So, if you had to name your top three bands, who would they be?
Gosh, they're all gonna be different rock. Actually, so I'm gonna go eclectic rock. So. If it's Spanish rock, it's Maná. If it's 80s rock or 70s like classic rock, Led Zeppelin, or and if it's alternative rock, I'm more like let's just say I grew up on oh damn, what's their names now? Well, I guess I'm not going to answer that question.
Well, don't you listen to some heavier stuff too, don't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's metal out there, but it's like you go through a phase and I'm sorry, not everybody ages out of it, I guess.
Guilty, completely guilty. Listen, dude, if you check my phone at any time, you're gonna see my playlist full with like deathcore and death metal.
Exactly. It's like you grew up into it, or I mean, let's say mosh pits in the 90s in a hot summer Miami it's very sweaty. It's incredibly sweaty.
Listen,
so dude,
there's something absolutely beautiful about being next to a fat, sweaty man in a mosh pit when you're screaming Machine Head lyrics as loud as you possibly can. And I've done that more than enough times to count, but there's something magical about that.
Yeah, I think it's like metal these days is and there's so much of it, so much variety these days that you figure out like when did all this like it's like I like wine and I look back and like you guys are treating this like wine, like the vintage of there's certain vintages of metal that you just appreciate differently at different times. Mm-hmm. And occasionally I'll go back and I'll listen to something. It's like, yeah, that was the sound. Like that's a great sound. Mm-hmm. And I just I always experience, I appreciate all music, honestly, because it's all self-expression. We just have to have more of it, and that's why most people appreciate metal anyway.
Right. Yes.
Because it just breaks through. It breaks through the wall, right? Mental barriers.
Hold on. Damn it. I was muted. One thing I posted on Twitter today, and a lot of people kind of gave me flack for it, was the new Metallica song. And look, I love all Metallica, even Load, Reload, and Saint Anger. People are going to cancel me. People are going to freak the fuck out because I just said that. What's your feelings on Metallica, from start till now?
Wow, it's probably one of the great, obviously one of the greatest bands of all time in any genre, really. And they've had they're so big they end up saying anything random, or any member of their band says something randomly, and it causes political firestorm. Like if they weren't musicians, they'd be politicians, but because they do say a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And go for Germans saying something political. They're outspoken. I mean, you have to understand the history of where that comes from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like political speech for them, no one else would say it in their background in Europe if they weren't saying it, right? Like they cross barriers that way.
Mm-hmm.
Again, music reaching the masses and with ideas that are popular at the time. So
yeah, there was something really sad about kind of seeing the culture that a lot of music is kind of taking hold of today. And as you can see, I'm a big fan of music in general, and I play in a band myself. So kind of the culture surrounding music is very, very important to me. And it's cliche at this point, but it used to be like Rage Against the Machine and all these bands were edgy back in the day, but now it seems like they're kind of raging for the machine, which is really, really sad, because it's supposed to be rebellious, because you're putting forth ideas through your music and you're sharing that with people, to a larger audience. And it's not always like explicitly political, but the ideas are presented to you that almost transcends politics.
Yeah, I mean they're living. So the story in music is that if you're a band that's making it, you're making it because you're talking about things to how do I say this? You're connecting with a younger generation about the older generation's material, really, because you're always a generation ahead or behind the current generation. Mm-hmm. when you make it. So you have, basically, if you're in your 30s, you have the late teenagers, repeating your lyrics, and it's like it has nothing to do with what they're living through right then and there. It's like maybe they're seeing the frustration their parents went through or something. Mm-hmm. I always found that interesting about music, because it's like a time machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's actually a really, really good way to put it. And I can't say I've ever really thought of it that way. But that kind of gets to a point that I wanted to ask you about when I was talking a little bit about being in a mosh pit with a fat, sweaty man and singing heavy metal lyrics, the most beautiful thing in the world that I grew up with. In 2020, and this is going to be able to carry us pretty much for the rest of the show. But I live in Pennsylvania, right? As we were kind of saying before the show about where we live and everything. So for me, the lockdowns really sucked, right? I mean, my wife, girlfriend at the time.
You're Western Pennsylvania, right?
Correct. So my girlfriend at the time, now wife, had got a letter from her work, and she worked for Philips, which built some of the what the fuck are the things? The ventilators, right? They were building ventilators at the time in 2020. She had got a note from her work saying whether or not, hey, if you get pulled over, show this to the police so they know that you're not outside of your house. I got laid off as a mechanic. Like, cars always are fucking broke, so I always have a job. I'm not worried about it. But like, getting laid off in 2020 fucking blew my mind. I love telling this story, and I love asking people this question because it really kind of shows how it kind of shaped their experience over the last 2.5 years. So I know that's a long tangent, but what was March of 2020 like for you? How did you see it? What did you think? And what was your experience like from then till now?
Well, to tell you the truth, I got really amped. The lockdowns is really what woke me up again about politics. Because it was visible in Florida. The bigger cities and bigger counties in Florida all locked down. They all closed schools. They all did their social distancing requirements. A lot of you hear the stories of a lot of small businesses going out of business, just saying we're generational businesses. We've been open for 3 or 4 generations. We're just done. We're not going to do this anymore. and they're all being and in the meanwhile, Walmart's open, the big box stores are open, and you can just go in there and you can ignore all the social distancing. You can walk in, and the small mom and pops. I mean, it's just like it felt like more of the same, because you always, in inner cities, what you have is you just have politicians who are either they're habitually breaking up roads or making it difficult to do business on these main streets, or they're doing it purposeful to allow for redevelopment of these whole communities. It's either a disaster. It's either this type of disaster or economic terrorism. Actually, I like to say is by neglect or purposefully, right? So it's I kind of saw that more of the same, but I really started seeing just how morally bankrupt the political class was, even in Florida, even locally. So it wasn't. The worst of it was really when you got into how stringent you had to be to work, and because to work. I think the working issues mandates for certain were severe. They lasted a lot longer than people realize in Florida. Not just curfews, but then of course the allowances for if you're going to work in a certain sector, you have to be now regulated in ways that you didn't intend to. So we have a huge healthcare industry. In fact, Florida is the oldest state in the country. So by and far, I mean, and that means the average. That means we have more retirees than on average than the rest of the country.
Sure.
And that means we have a huge healthcare space, and the whole healthcare space then is entirely regulated and mandated. Even if you were just a small vendor to it, you're mandated to have all these follow all these mandates, requirements. You don't even have to work in the hospital, or you could just be a supplier, and your whole company all of a sudden was required to mandate up, meaning get the certain medical cocktail they tell you to, right? Knowing that I don't know where you're going to post this after, so I'm assuming that the Y tube people
they don't like the certain terminology.
Yeah, they don't. They certainly do not, and or at least the bots that are on there.
Right.
So yeah, I mean that really pumped me up. In March, you don't really think about it that often because I don't have kids, and I didn't see how immediately they closed. I saw everyone else's kids though really going to school on the computers, right? In Miami, actually, they tried to switch over to the computers. Well, guess what happened twice? The whole thing shut down for 2 weeks because one kid figured out how to trigger a system failure of the entire school district. The guy, I don't know. I guess he was messing around with code. The ISP finally tracked him down, and he was a legit 16-year-old. I don't want to go to school, so I'm going to cancel school for everybody.
Yeah, he was plugged to Dallas Cooper, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and then the next one was, we're going to all the students in the school are going to move to the software that's not been vetted. That the only reason why people are going to get on it is because they gave $1 million to the nonprofit that is controlled by the superintendent of schools. Oh, okay, that's not shady, but we're not going to use it after all, and we're going to wait another week until everybody gets on these new virtual platforms. So, I mean, you just see open. I mean, it was open. For lack of a better way, open fraud. Really, the way that it was managed, it was the biggest wealth transfer in the history of in my personal experience, and I've lived through 9/11, right? So how can you and we took 10 years. We took what we spent in 10 years. We spent in 6 months, right? As a federal government, and that money just went into a small set of pockets, and we saw whole political careers blessed by all this funny money that got sent around. It wasn't, and I'm still, October comes around, presidential elections happening. I'm trying to, work with a local group to host the George Jorgensen campaign in Miami. Our venue gets locked down, and shut down because of noise complaint the night before in an empty restaurant. Who cares, right? Yeah. But they were, but no, they wouldn't happen. And the event ended up happening with dancing in the street, really. The speakers with external batteries and just going for it. Wow. So that's really what it comes down to. And that's what I remember from March. In that time period. I mean, there's the disaster would happen for the subsequent 2 years since. I mean, we didn't kids didn't get unmasked in schools until March of this year. So 2 full years later.
Really?
And oh yeah. They weren't the school mandate. Schools were generally mandating masks on students and their employees for almost 2 years until they so for whatever reason they said, okay, we have these new agreements that says we're not going to do that anymore. And on the back end though, school districts, the hospital districts still mandate, the intrusive medical procedures.
Yeah.
And you still have to obviously mask up there, and no particular reason, just we're going to follow the CDC guidelines because that's what the CDC guidelines will say, even though that's the directives from the Florida Department of Health say otherwise. So I mean, you can't really get treated in Florida in a public health hospital without having this recommended so-called recommended procedure done to you. So that's really what it comes down to. I said, I had a sit down with one of the editors for Reason magazine. No, I'm sorry, it was Reason. It was their medical writer for Reason. He's like, this is still happening. How come nobody's writing about it? Because I'm telling you about it now, you dummy. And he still hasn't written anything about it. I'm like, because Florida actually the Florida legislature did meet together to actually try to fix the law to prevent these type of intrusive mandates from happening again. So they fixed the law, but what they actually ended up doing was leaving in the language that said, oh, we can if for the next medical health emergency, we can still set up concentration camps and set up forced medical procedure processes and we can basically suspend habeas corpus for medical emergencies. And it can all be set administratively, so there's no habeas corpus, so there's no application to protect yourself in the courts. That was all left in there in Florida law. It's still there right now, and that was actually what was passed and as a result endorsed by Florida Republicans, with the support of Democrats. So it's the entire Florida political establishment, really.
I am stoked to tell you guys about the show's new sponsor. I am now working with MTS Nutrition, which is a brand that I've believed in for a very, very long time, and they run awesome cells and they have awesome products. So I want to tell you about their amazing protein powder, which you're going to ask me how many pounds I have of the protein powder, and the answer is all of them. So here I got red velvet cake, 25 grams of protein, and they have the amino acids and everything on there, 59 servings. Peanut butter fluff, fluffernutter, 26 grams of protein, and then also the chocolate chip cookie, which literally has real pieces of chocolate chip cookie in there. So 27 grams of protein, 180. As I've talked about on the show, getting your protein in is very, very important. So make sure you hit that link below and purchase your protein powder through MTS Nutrition. Boom!
So if you wonder that, how that got me more and more amped, and said, anybody going to run for office against this jerk? Any of these jerks, really. So it ended up being, I ended up running against running for against Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, not because of all that, but ultimately because the U.S. Congress decided to pass a national red flag law, voluntary. You have to states get to opt in, but they said it's literally the Florida model that we're copying and pasting and sending everywhere. And that got a lot of people pissed because over the entire course of the year, gun rights activists or self-defense activists were, following these legislators around all year, and the governor. Are we going to have a constitutional carry? Are we going to do something to defend, to say that especially in these, when you're saying medical emergencies, who's to say who's doing what, right? Do you have a right to defend yourself if you disagree with the government? So ultimately, Ron DeSantis had made statements in 2019 in favor of red flag laws. I knew this guy was going to be on the wrong side of it, and ultimately, when the federal government was talking about it, the legislature and the governor basically didn't say anything about it. They kind of were totally mum. They wouldn't make any statements in opposition to the national red flag law. To their credit, both Marco Rubio and Rick Scott opposed the red flag law, the national red flag law in the U.S. Senate. Rick Scott actually had signed it into law. So if you can imagine that, and Marco said, and Rubio had always said, no, he'd been even the more vocal of the two, and maybe that was enough for him to win a re-election without without too much stressing. But it was certainly, but the fact that this has been an issue that in Florida, basically gun rights groups have kind of been asleep, and they've been or not been asleep, but they've been surrendering to the fact that political expediency, we'll get it to you one day, eventually we'll get it to you, and they just caved in. Okay, we won't keep putting more pressure. So and there's a funny story about one of the activists for Gun Owners of America actually got arrested in front of a Republican Party like rally that was going to have the governor drop by, and the governor's campaign wanted the event to be a gun-free zone. The governor's campaign wanted it to be a gun-free zone.
There's something ironic about that.
Yeah, on public property, and Florida law doesn't let you do that. And the guy was just protesting on the sidewalk, and they didn't like what his sign was saying, and he had even permission from the city administration to be there. And eventually, someone just said, just arrest him and make his day. Yeah. So, but it was all stemmed from. I mean, I like to say that Florida has although Florida is run by Republicans, it is the most hostile to the Second Amendment, to the franchise of self-defense in any state in the country that's run by Republicans. So right now, I think they repealed red flag laws. The only other state that had red flag laws that was run by Republicans, I think, was Indiana, and they repealed them. So Florida is now the only state in the country with red flag laws on local, from the state level, having them in place. So it kind of tells you something about what's going on in Florida.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a whole bunch to unpack. So one thing that I'm sure you knew is that you would get a lot of flack from everybody for running against Ron DeSantis, but you've elucidated upon a lot of things that I think a lot of people don't really consider. And the one thing I think I've heard you lay out before on other people's shows is that there really is kind of this campaign to uphold DeSantis as kind of a figure. And there's this tendency for people to think that, there's only like all the news is left leaning. Every single news outlet is left leaning, but they fail to recognize that like the entire alt media and even some like the mainstream media is getting behind DeSantis and artificially boosting him. And it's really, really suspicious to me that this Guantanamo Bay, more than likely Skull and Bones Society JAG officer is being put forth as this kind of populist guy, but he's clearly an elite. And I don't have a problem with him being an elite, but he's really boosted as kind of like the guy, right? Where this was kind of Trump back in 2016, where I mean, there's even emails from Hillary's campaign saying, hey, we have to boost Trump because he's the only one that Hillary can defeat, even though he ended up winning. And I feel like there's more to this story that's not being told. It seems like we're getting the same thing with DeSantis, but the only difference between Trump and DeSantis is that Trump is too much of an idiot to have any kind of principles and to be any kind of like hammer in search of a nail. DeSantis is, to his credit, very absolute, and he's very concise and he's very focused, but he's focused as kind of this neocon governor. And when you compare him, in my mind, and you can push back on this all you like, my experience here seems to be a lot worse than it was in Florida. I personally believe him being in Florida is a good thing versus him being president. I think if he's president, then it's going to be like George Bush, satanic panic, neocon empire, war with South America, war with Iran, war with China. I think that's his potential as president. I know I threw a lot at you, but I'm curious about your thoughts about kind of how he's being boosted as like the guy for 2024 for the Republican Party.
Well, I think the analogy of or the comparison to how the mainstream media boosted Trump in before 2016 is accurate. I've been hearing that since the lockdown. So since 2020, I've been hearing from political circles that he was going to be boosted that way, and it'd be him and Gavin Newsom that will be boosted higher and higher. So you notice them trading jabs nationally and doing the same kind of tactics going around the country and even attacking other, looking for publicity by launching attacks, buying, even spending money, like paying for campaign ads, again, to criticize politicians in other states. So yeah, that's all there. Toward the end of the election cycle, so just the recent election cycle, the mainstream media was actually going out there and literally saying there was no lockdown whatsoever in Florida, and then Ron DeSantis picking up and up saying we kept Florida free. See, even the media is recognizing we kept Florida free. I'm like, yeah, I mean, tell that to the parents with children who have been held back for 2 years because they haven't actually had access to school, and to actually catch up on both the knowledge gap now and as well as and really childhood development issues that occurs. I mean, the lockdowns were just another form of child abuse, because we all know that the disease that people were talking about didn't barely afflicted children, young children, if at all, right?
Right.
And it, so those YT people, got to be careful with them. So that's what it really comes down to. So Elon only bought Twitter; he didn't buy the other guys. So that's really where it comes down to. We have problems in Florida that people minimize in order to, and that's not just the press. That's a great big group of people, and it makes you wonder why, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's for the most part, it's the first thing is going to be laziness. It can't. They've already just fallen into a narrative, and so to break out of the narrative actually takes some work, even if it's presented to you in a manner that you can say, okay, I could see that those descriptions are probably true, but it doesn't matter. It's minimal. It's these are the other things that are important. We'd rather prefer him there instead of this other guy or Democrat or his previous opponent in 2018 was found naked in a pool of his own vomit with a male prostitute in a South Beach hotel. That's the guy you wanted to have running Florida instead. That's so it's just all dismissive claptrap. So and then you turn around and I'm like, the next day after the election, I'm looking at Scott Horton's Twitter going, oh my God, this has to be verified. How can somebody be claiming now that Ron DeSantis was at Guantanamo, and not just at Guantanamo, but watching, making sure that the torture program there was in legal compliance? Yeah. I'm like, I need another source on this. I'm like, I've been saying it for like 2 years now. So I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what his resume was there. He has
and he was at Fallujah as well.
Yeah. And Fallujah was basically a mini Dresden for if you're comparing World War II. Basically, it was targeting civilian population to basically destroy a city. It was destroying a city. It was targeting civilian targets on purpose to demoralize resistance, right? And I know a number of people who were there on the ground. So the shit they saw was it was intense. How they describe it to me in private. But even I think even Adam Kokesh was in Fallujah. I think I know he was served in the time too. So it's people really need to remember their history. History tends to repeat itself, and it's like this is we're literally oftentimes we're just literally living through a script that was written by some Hollywood writer. Yeah, that was paid for by some scenario that was drummed up and say, hey, let's pitch it this way. And there's like pitch meetings, like they're treating this whole thing about there's a reason why they call we have a statesman statescraft. Why it's called this whole situation statescraft, because it's very much like drama, like putting on a play. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean that answers the question about how people will fall into it, but generally they jimmy up the other side. The left will, especially the mainstream media, will attack DeSantis, will try to attack the figure they want to promote, because the genders of response to protect that guy. See, he must be doing something right. It's not.
Yeah, that's the typical kind of thing, is that they always lifted up Trump to say he was doing this, he was doing that. But when there's so much focus on one specific person, I feel like libertarians tend to lean and default to the right a lot. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but they default to the right so much that they assume that there can't be anything wrong with them, and they're afraid to dig a little bit deeper. So, and if you follow the traditional right-wing definition, I'm pretty right-wing by definition, right? I mean, I'm married. I bought my house when I was young. I'm a blue collar kind of guy, right? I mean, if you look at me on a piece of paper, I'm pretty much a Republican, right? Although I am, through and through libertarian. So my job, I feel it's been to kind of pull the wool off of people's eyes of assuming that the right wing has to be good because the left's so bad. I agree with all the criticisms of left-leaning people, but what else can I add to that conversation? I should add to the conversation criticizing the right from the right, which I think you kind of did with DeSantis. But when it came to like the stuff with South America, you had people in his cabinet, not necessarily in his cabinet, but like Anthony Sabatini calling for the execution of foreign leaders. Like, we can't be saying this. And then, the IDF coming to clean up parts of Florida, and him saying, taking these trips over to Israel and saying he's the most pro-Israel governor. Right. A lot of people kind of sweep that under the rug. And look, I get it, because we've been told this narrative that DeSantis was the best on COVID, even though he did, as you said, lock Florida down. And he had his finger on the pulse. And I think you would give him credit for this too, that he had his finger on the pulse to kind of play the media to say, look, I kept Florida free. So, and whenever it stopped being politically expedient, he opened everything up. Or when it could be politically expedient, he opened everything up so that way he could get the praise and be boosted as the guy, right?
A lot to unpack there.
Yeah, sorry.
So let me start with a simple idea of you start with the premise that libertarians somewhat like they have this right wing thinking or something.
They default to the right.
Right, they default. It's not. It's a little bit more complicated.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is so you have Republicans like to give they like to talk their talking points. They like to maybe bring in a couple libertarian talking points, especially on economic liberty, right? On business, on the rights of businesses and the rights of people on property rights, particularly. And what ends up happening is just, especially in the last, 2008, since they implemented Obamacare. Yeah. I mean, there has just been a steady assault, clearly like this idea of a demarcation, a polarization in terms of property rights and taxation that has people pretty much split into these focuses. So all of a sudden now civil liberties and economic rights or property rights are separate, right? And that happens on the left and the right. And that's how people end up falling into this sort of a trap. But on the other side, so I feel like I represent an idea of a greater liberty movement that exists outside the Libertarian Party, that exists across America, that really doesn't have loyalty to any one party, political party. But I believe a lot of people that are in the Libertarian Party now are part of that. Sure. And there are many people who are in the Republican Party or politically independent, or even a couple Democrats that fall into that category as well. But the truth comes down to it is that if you came at that, the leaders in this whole the greater liberty movement they have made certain decisions as well that have compelled others to take strong stands in defending people like DeSantis. They just felt compelled. There's an obligation, right? And that happened under Trump, right? So Trump comes into office, he becomes the most anti-war president we've ever had,
which is really funny.
somehow that's we didn't start new wars or something, some kind of takeaway like that, and that's better than anything we've ever had in our entire in 2 generations, to some effect like that. So, so that's we end up having to. We end up having to look at people who we consider friends and allies. Their default position of theirs becomes defending the undefendable, and for the only purpose, not of growing liberty, not of increase, not of achieving certain policy gains, even, but of maintaining status quo.
Yeah.
Now, keep that in mind. Status quo is all that they're attempting to achieve at that point. So, and the problem or conflict that I ran into in challenging DeSantis is that I ran into that buzzsaw, that there are people who simply they appreciate status quo so much more than actually achieving wins, and they ended up coming out very hard on saying, well, libertarians can't win. We heard that, so we may as well just continue that. I'm like, well, whoever said that winning, a libertarian winning for office is actually the end goal, or the victory, the win that we should be seeking. And functionally, having so many people come out and say that was a win in and of itself on my side, because now, so this is really where people are committed to. This is their level of commitment. Their level of commitment is they would simply they're running they're associated to as a libertarian because they don't like Democrats, and they find this Republicans distasteful enough that they simply don't want to identify as a Republican. So in other words, they're simply libertarians who will vote for Republicans.
Right.
At the end of the day, or worse, a Republican who just identifies as a libertarian. And yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And of course they'll say, oh, those libertarians out there that we have to watch out for, they're just these left libertarians that are just Democrats who call themselves libertarian, right? You've heard of that. So at some point we have to say, well, where are the actual libertarians who want to be libertarians and support other libertarians and push libertarian policies? Where is that? We'll get there. It's through decentralization. Okay, so if we're supporting decentralization, why are you telling me how I should think? Shouldn't we decentralize, have people with multiple opinions and multiple ways of doing things, let them do their thing and organize in that direction? Why do you have to criticize them and work against them, even when you don't live in that state? So it's like, I mean, and it came really to head in the last election cycle with Arizona, and that's the what you think about that, by the way?
It seemed like if we're using the Libertarian Party as leverage to get favors from a candidate, it seemed like in that specific race, we went about it the entire wrong way, because Blake Masters had no political opinions for 13 years, right? He supposedly wrote for Lou Rockwell in 2006, and then there's this huge blank space from 2006 to 2019, and then all of a sudden he comes onto the scene, and we're supposed to believe that nothing's changed in those 13 years. We have no proof that nothing's changed, but we're supposed to believe that, and he's carrying all this water for actually a lot of the worst shit that's going on within the Republican Party right now. So I talk about it all the time, and people are probably sick of hearing me talk about it, but this whole Cold War with China that's ramping up, Blake is horrible on that issue. And we got very minimal pushback from, people who call themselves libertarians on this issue with him. Now, what I like about Scott Horton so much is that when he had Joe Kent on his show, Scott took him to task. Scott didn't fuck around when it came to Joe Kent on his show, which I liked. But what I didn't see out of Dave and Mark Victor was the same treatment to Blake Masters. And look, Blake Masters is a charismatic guy. He says a lot of the right stuff, but if we're going to use the Libertarian Party as leverage and throw our weight behind somebody, then they need to come to us, at least in some degree, right? So the concession should have been, I understand you're running as a Republican. I understand you have to get elected, but you have to be better on China and Israel, because these are going to be the two issues. Well, the China issue is going to be the next big issue. Every single time they renew the national defense strategies, China's the number one issue. It's not Russia, it's China. He's good on Russia, not great, because he said we should sanction Russia and, send Ukraine the help they need. but it just seemed like we really sacrificed Mark Victor. And yeah, he did fuck up with that whole, child or the age of consent stuff. It was an unforced error. Okay, yes, I can agree with that. But it really seemed like we threw Mark Victor to the side to have a conversation with Blake Masters. That really seems to be what it kind of boiled down to for me.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you're observing this as about the same amount, same distance that Dave is observing it, by the way. So, and a couple of other people too. If I maybe actually you might be closer now. Think about it in Western Pennsylvania. The issue is who cares? Like, why are we macromanaging what's going on in Arizona, right? Like, if we're really supporting decentralized solutions, why are we trying to create these backdoor deals? Because where are we going with that? Like, how far do we push that? And if like, honestly, it felt like somebody woke up in the middle, in early one morning or couldn't sleep at all, and then decided that starting at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to drunk tweet, right? I'm going to start drunk tweeting at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I had a banger, and that's the stuff that kind of came out. And then but then I've come to realize it was just like a lot coming to head, a lot of pressure, a lot of there's when it reaches that level, and it reaches the way that Mark Victor basically caved to pressure. There's a lot of things that happen that we will never know, or we shouldn't know,
Right.
that what really happened behind the scenes on that. But what everybody can agree on is that it was poorly executed. Something happened there that shouldn't have happened the way it did, and you don't. And it was just utterly embarrassing for everybody involved. And the whole episode probably cost Blake Masters votes rather than give him votes. In honesty, I mean, because it made him look like an asshole.
All right.
It really did.
Yeah.
So, and it just proved to, it gave people a harder look at Blake Masters as a result. What people should have been talking about was, how not that the former astronaut, really a former astronaut, should, in a time of science debate, should be reconsidered as someone who we would want to recall, right, or not reelect, and instead select someone who is about business, who's about what people really need, and instead of allowing the state, or this idea of a state governed by experts. There's a term for it, but basically ruled by science, right? The rule by scientists, and it wasn't one of those topics that really Mark Victor, not Mark Victor, Blake Masters was supporting. But it was something that libertarians have been talking about, because it was the thing that we were supposed to be talking about back in 2020 that the party wasn't generally doing either, and generally the movement wasn't either, by the way,
Right.
because you didn't hear them talking about you heard them going along to get along instead, because everybody was for okay, 2 weeks to stop the spread, sure, right, which turned into 6 months, which in some places turned to a year, which some places turned, and to the effect we're still living the effect now, and to ignore that that's the biggest issue in America right now, even today, is how do I say this? It fails to serve a public interest. Like, it's easier. Why, if I know that there's a lot of pressure from the media these days, and bear in mind, the people who influenced the election more than anybody was the media, trying to spin us out of, hey, we're in recovery, hey, we're doing rosy, hey, we're the greatest comeback, Joe Biden's a comeback kid, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, how's Scranton doing? You guys tell me, right? Like, let's talk about real places and real jobs that are sticking around, not just have more people on multiple part-time jobs.
Yep.
But that's really, let's just say, by running people for office, and like for myself, like running for me, exposed all the weaknesses, both of people in and out of the party, really what they're thinking, right? In Florida, the election numbers showed that more people saw Ron DeSantis as the the protest candidate than a libertarian or non-Democrat Republican. Period. Just that's it. They just clearly saw enough people who would typically vote this way voted that way, or didn't show up at all. Right? That says something. Okay. It's look at. I mean, these things do matter, even in percentages, because there are percentages. Not we're not. You don't. I don't care about the bigger numbers. I want to know where our numbers are. Right. So in Georgia, we saw exactly what was going on there. Voters gave Kemp in Georgia that is the governor of Georgia, a re-election in the first round. Mr.
Kemp.
What's his name again?
Brian.
Shane. No. Brian
sorry.
Kemp. But
yes.
Shane Hazel got less votes than he did 2 years ago. 2 years ago. So again, in a U.S. Senate election, right? So that's he was in the election for U.S. Senate against Warnock.
Yeah.
That's where Warnock got elected in the first place. So he got less votes in that one. Granted, it was a state election, right? State governor election. That was the only difference. But then Chase Oliver picked up that same election and also forced it into a runoff. I believe I have to double check, but their vote totals weren't that different, if I recall correctly. But it does say something. Actually, the governor of Georgia was the first governor. He has a reputation of being one of the lockdown governors. So that's why Shane actually had this whole confrontation. He even got into debates, right?
Yep.
Knowing that libertarians there's enough libertarians that are voting libertarian in Georgia to require libertarians to be present in debates. And that says something, because you're not, and by the way, this is like the fourth statewide campaign or third statewide campaign for Shane Hazel. And I think this is the second one, right? Because he ran for like Congress before. But the point is that you have to keep running candidates just to be able to say, we're running candidate, we're part of that's here to run candidates. If you're not even saying that, like it's like saying if we don't have, if we're not running candidates for president, why exist at all, right? Well, I say that too. If you're not running for candidates for statewide office, why do you exist as a state party in those parties, right? So, but then again, the pushback was, well, what happens if there's a pretty good candidate on the other side? I'm like, okay, does that mean what are you trying to say about that? We should all vote for them? Well, you make that personal statement if you want to, and certainly the way that it was handled, people just basically saying, should I not, and then waiting ultimately to the last minute to do so. It was, and the fallout from that was, it's specific, like Dave endorsing Blake Masters or Dave calling, saying, by the way, keep in mind, a lot of libertarians endorsed Ron DeSantis a year before I even decided to file. So I knew what was coming in my direction, but I did want to see what happened. But we needed to run candidates. It wasn't something to rest back on. And for the first time in over a decade, we had 2 statewide candidates in Florida. And we don't have that many statewide. I mean, there aren't that many statewide positions. Yeah. So and I was hoping to get one more in there. It didn't turn out. So the architect of the red flag laws in Florida actually got a pass. So I was like,
yeah. Well, so I guess one other thing I wanted to ask about, we've been shooting the shit for a little bit here, and I want to be respectful of your time. But the one thing that I'm sure you've probably heard a lot, and I'm curious your answer, why not work with the Republican Party to get a seat in a cabinet somewhere? Because and you can pull this apart as you like. In my mind, it almost seems like it would be easier in Florida to kind of get something like that done. It seems like Tho has had some success, and I disagree with some of his conclusions that he draws. But what's your opinion on that? And once again, I don't live in Florida, so I don't know what that's like.
What's up, everybody? We're going to take a quick break and tell you about the show's sponsors. We are brought to you by LMNT electrolytes. I've been using this stuff for years, and what I've honestly found is that if I didn't have electrolytes before some kind of cardio, and sometimes even before workouts, that my workout performance, or definitely cardio performance, would suffer greatly. Sodium is responsible for every single movement pretty much in your entire body, and let's say you drink a lot of caffeine like I like to do, then maybe it is a good idea, like I do every single morning, put some LMNT chocolate electrolytes there in your coffee to get a little bit more sodium, potassium, and magnesium in your coffee, so that way whatever diuretic effect you get from the caffeine is pretty much diluted by the fact that you put chocolate salt in it. Also, it tastes really, really good. Get some chocolate cream or hazelnut cream or even coconut, and mix that all up. It tastes really, really good. So yeah, make sure you drop by, go to drinklmnt.com/inlibertyandhealth and pick you up some electrolytes today. All right, guys, thanks.
Tho Bishop, a writer, a contributor and writer to the Mises Institute blog, is his only success is like a party leader in a small backwater county that has more public corruption in it than most of the other states on average, most of the other counties on average. It's not a lot to gloat about. In fact, he must be a great example of nepotism, because I don't really find his writing that compelling either. So, it's just somebody who's serving a purpose, and there's always useful idiots somewhere, honestly. And though Bishop did chicken out of debating me on a big platform, so why the Libertarians should run against DeSantis. Or again, I was going to be against and he was going to be pro, and he said no. You have to. He literally said I have to drive 14 hours to go see him for an in-person debate that he might not. He still would chicken out of, honestly. So I don't give Tho Bishop any credit whatsoever. But with that said, I do understand that there's a lot of people in the Mises Institute that feel a certain way about supporting Republicans. That's totally on them. I mean, they do a lot of good work. I'll just leave it at that. But to putting Tho aside, then moving on from Tho, I can't remember what the other thing was because you triggered me on Tho.
Oh no, I apologize. Yeah, I don't have any personal problems with it, but like I said, it's I just think some of the conclusions he draws are silly. But why not work in the Republican Party? Because it seemed, like I said,
so
good.
Okay, I got it. So Florida. So what people have to realize around the country in Florida, Republicans in Florida have a super majority control in the state. They have control of all the cabinet level positions. They have more than 2/3 of both chambers of the legislature. They have, out of 67 counties, they may have 62 sheriffs. They control the vast majority of county commissions. I mean, so it's not a it's not a libertarian thing. That there is no one else to work with, really. So it's really, do the Republicans want to work with anybody else? Nope. They do. So the Democrats have to pay Republicans for access now. And same with Libertarians. We have to pay our due too, and figure out a way where's the pressure point. So in fact, I'm speaking to a Republican group, a group of Libertarians that are registered Republicans. I'm going to be speaking to them next week at a Christmas, one of their Christmas meetings. And what do they even do, right? Because they're stuck too. It doesn't matter if you're a registered Republican in the Republican Party. If you have no further manner for advancement, what do you do? And really, part of what I'm going to talk to them is really this idea of decentralization. And we really do need. What can we do? What should you do is what you can do, right? The decentralization model is excellent, right? It's from the work that's promoted by the Mises Institute and Hans Hoppe in terms of creating alternatives in the marketplace to assume operations or tasks that are handled to the government. Perfect. But generally speaking, but more that's the longer term. But more in the shorter term, it means promoting policies of nullification, right? Using local jurisdictions to nullify legal state and national laws, create that sort of competing jurisdictions of liberty, right? So those are actually those are distinctly possible and it's been proven across smaller jurisdictions across the country. So some of it will end up in courts, but if voters are voting for these measures, if you put it on a ballot and voters are voting for it, judges are very unlikely to overturn the will of the public, will of the people, because they'll just keep coming back until finally you build up enough of a group that says, these Republicans are out of control. They're just statists with a different name, and you can start passing these statewide referendums. I made a presentation. Was it 2 weeks ago? I'm sorry. No. So we are, almost a month ago, to the Libertarian Party's National Committee. Just sharing with them, if for all these ballot access conflicts that are happening around the country with different states, do what Florida did, which is we have our ballot access enshrined and protected in the Florida Constitution. We got that voted in on a statewide referendum, and frankly, if there's enough, there's more than 35 states that have voted in some type of cannabis, pass some kind of cannabis protections. If you can get cannabis passed on a ballot, you can get ballot access passed on a ballot. Right. It's just a matter of which one of these states has the easiest way to get on the ballot. Go and do that. Go and get the signatures. Because if you have to come back and expend enormous sums of energy to just some of them are unreasonable. Well, if you have to expend enormous amount of energy to get ballot access and it's easy to get on a referendum this question permanently, you should do that. There's some states that you just have to run a candidate every once in a while and get 1% of the vote, which doesn't seem to be terribly difficult, like Connecticut, right? But there's other states like New York, that are just so horrible. I said New York, by the way, that are just so horrible. You just have to bite the bullet, right? And in other words, part of the mission is is to, and these aren't my words, I'm copying people who have a lot more experience at this than I do, that the Libertarian Party has to have as its goal opening up the third lane for American politics, something that's not a Democrat or a Republican. And if we're not focused on those kind of tasks, we're not focused on growing the Libertarian Party itself, and we are consistently taking the liberty movement broadly and saying it only, we have to look like Republicans, right? In other words, instead of ignoring all these other things at that level, then we have a problem. That we're not. In other words, we've killed our future. Right. We don't have a future, unless that means a return, right? Or a rep turn, right? Something like that. Doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. We've already done that. Now you want to go a full 180. And that's really that's really where I have people. It doesn't mean that you have to be like everything I just said. Doesn't mean that you have to be exclusionary of the Republican Party. For the Libertarian Party, you can still exist in this idea of the liberty movement. I think in Florida, for instance, there are a lot of states that don't even have like voter rolls, right? They don't have these harsh controls that exist that must be labeled this certain way. Right. Florida doesn't have you can't register the same day like you can in Iowa, and just pick which ballot you want, or New Hampshire for that matter. I don't know how it's like in Pennsylvania, but I know the residency requirements to run for office in Pennsylvania can be high, like 4 or 6 years, something ridiculous sometimes. But and of course you can't be adjudicated. You can't have your rights adjudicated back to you if you're you've served your time. And given that, what is it like? There was a statistic that came out 20 years ago that said that one in every 2 adults in America had been convicted of a felony at some point. I'm like, just by the way, for everybody who's listening, if you don't understand these statistics, out of every voting age adult in America, only half of them are even registered to vote. The next half half of that don't vote at all, and then so you're not to a quarter of you're down to a quarter of voting age adults that even generally participate. Of those, half of them are the ones that are regular voters, and half of those now we're down to about 5% are like the ones that you can convince to change their vote one way or another. And realistically, you only want half of them. You're only going to spend money. all these campaigns are trying to convince half of that half to flip. So
Right.
now all elections are down to trying to convince less than 3% of all voting age adults to vote a certain direction. So that means that 97% of 97, like these campaigns, the media are all operating under this idea that that they only have to convince the ideas of 3% of the rest of the population. This is not democracy. I mean, although people like to say this is the exact the people who are voting and through democratic means are setting the tone for our elections. It's true, but there is an enormous silent majority out there that we should continue to use that phrase until people get tired of hearing about it, that are not represented in this political system at all, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. So I firmly believe the future of the Libertarian Party is to stand out there and say, you know, the dollar is dead. The way that we should the way our society is organized in allowing ourselves to ask permission constantly for everything is dead. We should try and the way we've allowed basically our relationships and our commerce to be dictated in the terms of a third party is dead. Like at this point, you know, when we look at that, you can not only can facilitate barter, you can do cryptocurrencies exchanges outside of the U.S. dollar. Then you don't need anything else. Just you can stand outside of this controlled economy, and now we can live under a society under our own terms that does not require the rule of American law. It's just natural law. So again, but everything I just told you is, if you're going to support a power structure within the Republican Party is tied to the dollar. It's tied to the system. It's tied to those to this great call it the church of the U.S. government, right? I mean, you have to pay your tithes to the government. It's called taxes. You have to worship its leaders and certainly listen to their priests for guidance, which are their elected officials. And ultimately, the people who benefit are the ones who sit on the boards of those organizations too. So, so if we're not, we have to actually look at where is the country going, where is the market going. Ultimately, when we see such tyranny, as we've seen the last 2 years, and where we saw people just say, "I want to avoid as much tyranny, so I'm going to stay home, or I'm going to opt out of society. I'm going to use Amazon as much as possible, even though everything's not locked down anymore." And you see what the market is going towards. You see a couple positives, right? You see that people just want to opt out. They will always go towards, if this is easy, if society is easy enough to do without government, they'll do that actually. Because they've already opted out of it once. They showed they could do that. They didn't really say. And on the other side, people's personal behaviors in terms of like the shopping, they can expect Amazon to deliver the same day service, and they're going to want that from government too. So if we can stand on that end, we can certainly we have a possibility to just activating all these people into something new. And that's really, we do have to be there. People, I mean, if I have to prophesize this kind of stuff, so people can understand it and put into proper terms, then fine, I'll do that. And that's quite possibly, that was actually the original intent of the Libertarian Party in the first place. Like, we don't need to have the large, like, in other words, that yes, it may be said too much, but our campaigns are educational programs, that intend to do that. And if you get lucky, if we're getting elected, it's what does that actually mean, right? That actually means that society's changed, right? That society's changed, the culture's changed, and they're willing to actually ignore the media and elect a libertarian to office, or adopt the libertarian principles. Ultimately, that they'll change their own behavior. They'll vote with their feet. They'll vote with their wallets. They will, because that's where we win. We have to win that war. We have to win that game in order to win the whole prize. And of course, and the number one reason why I'd say libertarians should run wherever, whenever, is because it does not. it's far easier to stand against something than it is to be for something. So, and you only need a small minority to stand and say no to this, to withdraw their consent, to suddenly convince politicians to not enforce bad ideas, or not implement or enforce bad ideas or bad. Like we would have had this idea of a vaccine passports, right? There was probably they'd been shuffled around for a long time, but they actually at this point they probably have been implemented in a lot of places, but they're certainly not enforced, right? Because that's only waiting for the next time when people are scared again. But so again, it's really about how can you defend yourself from tyranny, and really it's just having the ability to opt out, because they can only affect us if we're in their system, if we rely on their money, rely on their courts, rely on their protection, rely on their institutions, right? Opt out. I mean, that's really where we have to represent the future. Some people will call it a replacement economy. Some people will just consider that some type of breakaway society. But there's a lot of ways to define that. If you're let's just say, like, if you were going to use like a Bible reference, is just be not of their world, right?
Yeah.
Like really, like, right. So what? And frankly, libertarianism really is the golden rule, right? And in political application.
Right.
All right, I said enough. So,
dude, you're good. There was a lot of good stuff there. Hector, I've really enjoyed this conversation a lot, and we touched on a lot of stuff I didn't think we would touch on, but I'm glad we kind of got to go through everything.
Well, tell me, what did you expect? What surprised you? I'd like to know.
I mean, we dived into music stuff, and then obviously your thoughts on what it means to run as a libertarian, and then your criticisms of DeSantis, and even to the larger idea of what the Libertarian Party's function is. And I think there's a lot of use in that. I've become disaffected with my state party as of late, but I try not to dwell on that too long, and I try to stay as positive as possible. And I have a good connection with a lot of great people within the party, not only here, but all throughout the country. And I know there's plenty of great people that do a lot of great work, such as yourself and Dennis Mizagoy down there. I think Dennis is absolutely fantastic. And he was probably one of the people that I vocally supported the most, because I knew who he was running against was so horrible that I understand the chance for him winning was very, very slim, but anything we could do to kind of raise him up and support his voice being the only anti-war candidate on that panel was huge. When you have somebody that actively calling for attacking another country that, we're in this Cold War with, that needs to be defied as loud as possible. So, I spoke so much and gave so much support behind Dennis, because I felt like his voice being out there was very, very important. And not that yours wasn't either, but just someone so vocally for war with China is just, that cannot be tolerated. That shouldn't be tolerated. So like I said, we tapped on a lot of stuff. Like I said, I want to be respectful of your time, and I think my dogs are going crazy because my wife's home. If you don't have anything else, do you got anything else to add?
I'll just say one thing about two things to take away. So DeSantis is now Trump's problem, right? So I love competition. This is why competition must happen, right?
Right.
But it does seem everything's been lined up against Trump in order to support Ron DeSantis, to promote his brand. Nobody else. There's no other talk of any other candidate out there. By the way, you noticed, for president of the Republican Party. And same as also quite kind of quiet on the Democratic side, other than Gavin Newsom. So and my last takeaway is you can always be frustrated with libertarians, always. But you know what? We have to realize that there is no silver bullet to this, right? People are using their relationships to the best of their ability, and they feel that they can, that it's worth it to them, right? Even if it sounds contradictory, even if it sounds bad, sometimes just people make just god awful mistakes. They're human, right? You do have to give them space for that. But how does it affect you and how and your only livelihood and I think that says a lot. I think it says a lot, and frankly, I'm really interested in seeing this experiment in the Libertarian Party in 2024, what that's going to achieve in terms of with the candidate that gets put on the national ballots, for that ticket. I'm very excited. I think there's a lot interesting to happen. And I've said this maybe once before on the podcast, and I'll be happy to end it on this note. Sure. People give a lot of people criticize Jo Jorgensen and her run in 2020, but you have to remember she was actually the first actual internal party member to be selected as the nominee. What was it, 8, 12, 16 years that wasn't a Republican, a former Republican that was just picked into she was the first, really, and people have to recognize that whatever impact the impact of the liberty movement in the Libertarian Party has already started, right? And it wasn't, and it's just a lot of people know that this has to be the movement has to create its own internal candidates. Mm-hmm. So, and we have a lot of people, honestly, that we have so many that we're already debating about it, and that's a wonderful thing. So I'd say the future of the Libertarian Party is there. If it has good people like you, like me, like Dennis putting the work in there. He worked a lot longer on, he had been running a lot longer before I decided to jump in, literally on the last day of qualifying. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud to call him a friend.
Nice. Yeah. Well, he's been on this podcast and he'll definitely be on again. As the invitation will be open to you as well, because I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Hector, where can everybody find you?
I'm on Roos for Florida, ROOS for FOR Florida, on Twitter, socials. I have to update my website, but it's still there too. It's been, thanks Kyle for having me. Say hi to your the missus and go play with the dog who's I keep seeing running in and out.
Yeah, my pit bull didn't stop in, or at least I don't think she did. If she did, it was only for a brief second. She normally doesn't stop in. Yeah, he's wagging right behind me. But yeah, Hector, this is a really fun conversation. Very illuminating, and I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it as well. And despite the fact that people threw rocks at you for running against DeSantis, I think you're a great person, and I think you represent the party very, very well. And like I said, people can bag on you for that all day, but if this is the way that you see you're most effective in making change, then I support you completely. And I support anybody in the adventure to bring about greater liberty, whatever way they see fit, because as you said earlier, there's no silver bullet. So, yeah, man, if you've got any other takeaways or anything else, we'll close her out and I'll see you on the other side.
Awesome. Thanks. You have a good night.
Thank you. You too.